Let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaining, feedism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show for the first time. Today we've got Jack.
Hello.
Hello, so nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being here. How are you today?
I am very well. It's a horrible evening in Norway, so I can't think of a better activity than to be sat inside talking to you two.
Oh, my goodness. Well, listen, it is, of course, winter months officially in the Northern Hemisphere, which I've been here for 5 years now, and this is still weird to me that winter actually occurs at the time when everybody in the universe tells me that it should be occurring. But, you know, winter, cold, snow and frost and ice and shit. It's very standard, I've noticed. But listen, thank you so much for joining us today. And of course, you're based in Norway. We're going to be talking about life in Norway. And just before we kick things off, is there anything that you'd want to say to our listeners, Jack?
Yes, so I am based in Norway, as you say, James, but I am actually from the UK originally. I've been here for 8 years, living in Oslo, which is the capital. And I suppose, although I have my own thoughts, my own opinions on the gaming scene in Norway, on how things go down here, I'd like to issue a challenge or an invitation to any Norwegians who are listening to this, who may not agree with what I'm about to say, who may think I've missed stuff out, or who just want to come with a different perspective. Get in touch. I'm sure James and Tim would be happy to hear from you and get your perspective as natives. So yeah, that's just a little caveat to start off with.
I'd like to get to know more about Norway, because literally the only thing that I know about it, besides like Norwegian mythology and the Marvel movies, is the Epcot ride, where it used to be like a journey through Norway, and now it's all about Frozen. But right. I'm old enough to remember when the ride was actually educational. So.
No, the ride was educational because you old enough to remember when the Vikings first fucking came over from Norway.
And it's we have a photo of us in front of the Norwegian pavilion, don't we, James?
We have a photo of us in front of most of the pavilions, to be fair.
Very good.
But we were in front of like a
it was like the dark wood with the really
yeah. But what was that called? Was that like a longhouse or a temple?
Could be a longhouse. It could be a stave church as well.
Could have been. I can't remember what they call it there, but yeah, that's about the extent of my knowledge of Norway.
It was fun.
I mean, honestly, what else do you need to know? You know more than most people.
And then I start rolling the exit music because we've just done the entire episode.
Let's talk about it.
No, and you know, to bounce off what you were saying, Jack, inviting people on, I want to be clear about something here. We do endeavor to the best of our abilities to get as many different people onto the program as possible, as many different perspectives. And of course, especially for these culture apps, we always endeavor to get people who are native to these countries, who have that innate lived experience to share, because of course that is going to be different to what you can share today, and it is what it is. But there's only so much we can do if people are being non-responsive, or if we ultimately don't know the right people. We can reach out, but sometimes it's about who comes back to you. And of course, Jack, you've been so gracious to give up your time to speak tonight. So as you had said to our dear listeners, if anyone from Norway is listening, or anywhere else in the world that is traditionally English is not the dominant language there, please reach out to us. Please endeavor to talk to us. Please let us know that you're listening, because we want to get the right people on to speak on things. We want to get the diverse people. That includes more women through the door, more people with disabilities, of course, people of color and people of different sexual and gendered backgrounds, all of it. So yes, talk to us, reach out to us, DM us at Thicc Radio on Instagram, at either of us on our varying accounts, which you'll always see in the show notes at the end, or email us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So, with all of that said, Jack, are you ready to get into it today?
I am indeed.
Oh, wonderful. Now listen, tell us about Norway. What is your interpretation of that day-to-day culture? What is it like?
I don't think that Norway is particularly different from most other Western countries. I mean, life follows a fairly similar routine to, I think, what most listeners in the West would be used to. The working day is from 8 to 4, so I guess an hour earlier than perhaps in the UK at least. Um, People have a lot of free time, which is very nice. The work-life balance is generally very good here. So people have a lot of time for hobbies, for taking care of the kids. Generally, parents can pick up their children from, the kindergarten with no problem, and lots of holiday. It's a pretty good place to live, to raise a family, certainly, but it's an expensive place. I think this is one of the stereotypes that people have about Scandinavia and Norway in particular, which is certainly true. A pint here will set you back at least £10. That's sort of minimum, and it's gone up since I've lived here. So you can imagine, I don't know what we're heading towards, but nothing good. So yeah, it does require you to have a certain level of income, which as a student currently I do not have, but hopefully post-graduation things will look a bit sunnier. So yeah, expensive, but a fairly chill place to live, I think, is a kind of superficial summary of the place.
I mean, listen, just calling you out here, judging by the size of you, I think the reason why the price of beer has gone up is because you bloody drank it all, mate. So you need to slow down and leave some for the locals, you bastard. Sorry, my bad. You fat bastard. My apologies.
There we go.
There we go. Got to get the pronouns correct there, of course. No, but it's interesting, of course, always, I think, this part, contrasting what we experience and what we perceive. I mean, Haller, what are the biggest stereotypes about Scandinavia? High cost of living, high quality of life, Vikings, Frozen, and then just everyone's like really tall.
Yes, really tall and good looking, right? I mean, there's a reason I'm over here.
Blending in with the crowd, doll. I don't know.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, if you weren't the size of the bloody mountain itself, then maybe you would be. They think you're part of the backdrop, not the foreground. Tim, what about in America? What are the stereotypes about? We obviously talked about Frozen and that stuff, but what are some other stereotypes that come up about Norway?
I think that it's just the Viking thing that everyone leans into. Like, I think all Americans assume that people from Norway wear helmets with horns and cast iron braziers and carry spears and, a boat everywhere that they go. And like everything is constantly covered in ice and snow. But I have seen photos of Norway from my cousin went on a grand tour of Europe for her honeymoon, and she showed me some photos of Norway that it looked so picturesque, as if it was almost like in a fairy tale. So is that true that the surrounding countryside has this very whimsical, magical green kind of feel to it?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the scenery around the whole country is pretty incredible. Around Oslo, I suppose it's not what people really think of. It's not kind of the mountains and the fjords as such, but it's very pleasant rolling hills, and you don't have to go too far until you hit some really gorgeous scenery. So yeah, I mean, the country is really gorgeous. That is completely true. And you mentioned that people go around by boat. That is also true. I mean, this country is basically it's just rock and water. So the only way for people to get around is either by flying. Norwegians are the biggest flyers in the entire world per capita, or through taking a ferry. Because the roads, it's just, it's not the most efficient way of getting around.
So then do they have an intricate system of rivers and channels, or?
So it's mostly fjords. It's kind of these really long, how to describe a fjord properly? It's this indentation, if you like, into the country, which extends a long way. It's where a glacier used to run. And when the glacier has disappeared, it's left this sort of huge crevice in the country, basically, and the entire west coast all the way up to the north is just covered in these fjords. So they're just these sort of long arms of water that reach in inland. If you were to build a road, you'd have to, I mean, it's like you'd have to go around for hours and hours in order to get where you were going to go.
Okay.
It would take like 20 minutes across.
There's also something about herring, right? The Norwegians and herring.
Yes, there most certainly is. Herring and all other assorted, smelly, rotten, and otherwise quite unpleasant
Oh,
fish
goodness.
is
Yeah,
pretty
isn't there
popular
one
here.
that's really popular? Isn't it? Is it called skate? Is that what it's called? It's like a type of like shark.
You might be thinking of the
Ah,
Icelandic thing, isn't it?
Icelandic, yes.
Oh, never mind then. I thought it was
Weird.
I
normal.
mean,
This is probably a good point to bring up, right? Because obviously we've talked, not to say we haven't talked about Norway, but obviously we're referencing a lot of Scandinavia. So, like, what are the actual distinctions of Scandinavia? Like, does Greenland count? Do the Faroe Islands count? Does Finland count? Like, what are the actual countries that make up Scandinavia? Is there still like a unified Scandinavian identity? Like, go for it.
okay. Well, how long have you got? I mean, this is this is quite a difficult question to answer. But in general terms, Scandinavia refers to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. So these are the three countries which share a sort of common Germanic Viking background. They speak languages which are, to all intents and purposes, mutually intelligible. So that means that I, as a Norwegian speaker, can speak to a Swede and a Dane, and we can use our own languages and still understand each other. That's how similar they are. Then you get to Finland, which they will definitely tell you are not Scandinavian at all. They don't like being lumped in with the Scandies. They are Nordic, and this term covers the entire area along with the Faroes and Iceland. So they all share a common history to an extent, but Finnish as a language and a culture is quite different to the Scandinavian culture. It's much more Eastern looking. The language is very, very different, has absolutely nothing to do with the Scandinavian languages. In fact, Finnish is actually a sister language to Estonian, which is
Okay.
across the sea there to the south. So there's more cultural connections there in a way than there are with the Scandi countries in the West.
Because it goes Finland, Estonia, that little nubbin of Russia, and then goes to Poland, right?
That's right. And then you've got Latvia and Lithuania in between Estonia and that little nub of Russia.
And that makes up the Baltics.
Correct.
See, as a non-European, I am learning my shit. I am ingratiating myself with the continent. I am learning people. What do we know?
You're doing the Lord's work.
Doing the lad's work. Actually, I think I find.
I wish more Americans would do that, because I can remember. Do you guys remember when there was that political conflict in Georgia?
Yeah.
And like all of the headlines were saying like, oh, so, I can't remember who invaded who, but like troops invade Georgia, and there were a bunch of Americans who went, "What? Georgia's been invaded?"
Oh my God.
Not Georgia the state, Georgia the country.
Well, I mean, it's hard to tell when all the lights went out.
I know, right? Like I wish that we were more knowledgeable about the rest of the world. It's kind of sad.
Well, it's a little bit like Groundhog Day, but instead of looking for a groundhog to determine if there's 6 more weeks of winter, it's that one woman from the show that you showed me, and she throws a baton up in the air, and if she catches it in one hand, then there's 6 more weeks of lights being out. So, so that's
That, just so that you will know, and so one day your children will know, was the night the lights went out in Georgia.
Was the night that James got us back on track for the episode. So, speaking of...
you brought it up. I had to give the quote.
But
Of course.
and as if I didn't derail us myself. So back on Norway, I love that there is essentially more than meets the eye, right? I love that there is a fulfillment of a stereotype, but also maybe not so much, right?
Mhm.
Fun times. What would you argue, though, is the biggest misconception that people have about Norway?
Yes, this is a very good question. And I think the number one answer to this has to be that Norway is an eco-friendly country. If you read any news in Anglophone media about Norway, it is always overwhelmingly positive. I think, yeah, maybe 1 in 10 critique Scandinavia. Certainly in the left-wing media, it's just all so positive. And, you know, I'm not trying to say that there's nothing positive about living up here, but Norway is one of the biggest exporters of petrol in the entire world, petrol and oil, right? And then we'll say, oh, well, you know, we don't use this oil here. We're a green country. It's like, hang on, that's not how this works. You're still extracting all of this oil and selling it to countries in Africa, countries in Asia, and then pointing the finger at them and saying that they're not green. It really doesn't work like that. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, this is partly for reasons of geography, but Norwegians are the biggest flyers in the world. And that alone, I mean, there's only 5 million people here, but Norwegians have a massively outsized contribution to sort of, you know, pollution. They have a massive, a much bigger carbon footprint than people elsewhere.
I always forget that some of these countries just have giant swaths of uninhabitable land. So it's like, when I hear only 5 million people in the whole country, I'm like, oh God, but the country's so big. I'm like, yeah, but like the whole northern half of it is in the Arctic Circle, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Not a lot of living you can do there, really.
Australia too. So
yeah.
What'd you say?
The American does this about the middle of Australia too. But it's
and the top of Canada. I forget that the whole top of Canada is uninhabitable. So
right.
like because I come from a country where we will utilize every tiny bit of space available. Like our government has to tell us that miles and miles of land has to be reserved, you know, just for nature. Because if they didn't put those laws in, we'd be living on top of each other. They'd just be houses in the sky, just one stacked up on top of the other, because we have no reverence for land in this country.
I mean, I think it's the same here really as well. It's just the fact that, you know, as you say, it is so difficult to live on a lot of the land here that stops people, but every piece of available land is used here as well. I mean, if it wasn't, then people would have nowhere to live. So it's not much better here either. And like, yeah, the sort of the reverence for nature that I think lots of people think that characterizes Norway is just not true.
So you're telling me that the balance of 5 elements that Elsa captures at the end of Frozen 2 is a lie, Jack? Is that what you're saying?
I hate to break it to you.
No, don't. Let me have the fantasy just a minute longer, please. No, but it is interesting to hear that, because again, I think it's stereotypes about that. But in contrast, what is the culture in Norway like when it comes to fatness, right? When it comes to being fat, becoming fat, body positivity, and gaining?
So I suppose a stereotype that definitely does hold true of Norway is that it is a country of health freaks. This population is extremely active. You can look outside any time of day or night, there'll be a jogger going past. And if they're not jogging, they're on skis. That is also a completely correct
Just cross-country over
literally.
Hello, good morning. How
Honestly,
are you?
It is exactly like that. There is an expression in Norway which says that Norwegians are born with skis on their legs, so you feel sorry for their poor mothers, but it's also true. I mean, they learn to ski when they're in kindergarten, so it's the kind of active lifestyle is very much imprinted on them from a very young age. So I don't think I need to spell out what that means for how fatness is perceived in this country.
It's interesting because, and I found this curious when I moved away from Australia, when you're a child, you are taught to swim. And it's interesting to me that in other Western countries like the US and in the UK, yes, you might have swimming programs, you could have a swimming class, but it's not the same kind of push like what we have in Australia. Like, you are graded on your ability to swim, and it's kind of like, if you were in a certain grade, or at least this was true for me when I lived in New South Wales, if you were in a certain grade in school and you wanted to go on the excursion, but you didn't have the requisite level of swimming qualification confirmed, you weren't allowed to go. Because if that excursion involved water, you needed to be able to take care of yourself. Like, year 7, we did this excursion. We were up on Burleigh Heads Beach, up near the Gold Coast. I was living in the Gold Coast at the time, but like, it's this great river estuary where the actual rush of water can be so intense that kids who didn't have a high enough swimming grade weren't allowed to go, which also there were no kids who weren't allowed to go because we were all made sure that we were all a high enough swimming grade because it was such an insistence. But it is very curious to me, like what countries will prioritize as skills that you can function on, that like skiing is such a thing in Norway. But it makes sense that it would be skiing.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I think for exactly the same reason as why swimming is such a vital life skill in, I guess, particularly Australia, depending on where you live, but in general, is that, yeah, if you can't ski, you're kind of in trouble if you want to get around in the winter. I mean, living in Oslo, of course, in a city, it's not quite the case, but in a lot of rural communities, like my boyfriend skied to school in the winter. That was just normal. That's what he did. That's how you got around. It was the quickest and safest way to do so. I know it sounds crazy, but it's genuinely true.
Oh, here's a question. What's that thing I see where people are like walking on tennis rackets? What's that?
You might be thinking of snowshoes.
Maybe I don't know. I just know that I've seen cartoons about like people who go to the icy countries and in order to like walk effectively across snow, they have to basically strap what looks like a tennis racket to the shoe and then start walking.
Yeah, I think that's a snowshoe.
Is that a
They're quite fun to use.
To be fair, I don't think that originated in Norway. I think that may have originated with the Inupiat people.
Okay.
I think I could be
Yes.
completely wrong about that. And if I am, I apologize, listeners. Please don't come for me. I don't know any Inupiat people, but if you do, ask them if that's if they were the ones that invented that, because I'm fairly certain they were.
Just as the skis were probably invented by the Sami, who are the original population of Scandinavia.
Okay, just Googling it. Apparently it's unclear where they were invented, but it was most likely somewhere in Central Asia around 4,000 years ago. So there you go. Lessons learned, people.
Yeah.
If
Now we
anyone
know.
in Central Asia wants to comment on that, Tim, I know you were around 4,000 years ago, but if anyone else would please
I'm
reach out.
not
I
that
swear,
old.
Tim
I'm not
gets
that
such
old.
short shrift on this podcast for his
No,
age.
no, it's like but we were what were you talking to me about a couple weeks ago? You said that they found this like cache of wine in the desert in Egypt. And I was like, oh good, they finally found it. I forgot where I hit that.
As long as you hit back with it, it's all cool.
He doesn't. He
Especially with
doesn't.
a cachet of wine. Oh my god, that's amazing.
Yeah, he doesn't go for me nearly as hard as I thought he would, but that's okay. I'm sure he's saving it up for when I
I'm too
turn.
busy laughing. You're making me laugh. I can't come up with a good comeback when I'm laughing.
Well, what can I say? And the reason I, of course, go for Tim is because Tim is 40, but looks young and gorgeous, and I am young, but I look 40. So I'm trying to balance the scales.
It's okay, honey. I know somebody who's only a couple of years older than me, but he looks like he's in his 50s, so don't worry about it.
Oh, so you saw me from the future. That's what you saw. It was me coming back to the past to let you know to hold on. My God. But zeroing zeroing in a little bit more on like I guess resources for plus size people in Norway, thinking about things like fashion and maybe even things like mobility aids, things like that. What is that like?
I can't super speak to things like mobility aids. I think that is generally quite well provisioned for because of the comprehensive health service in the country, but I can certainly speak in terms of the clothing that's on offer, which is pretty abysmal. The selection of clothes, firstly, is just so woeful. I'm going to sound super capitalist when I say this, but I just miss the variety of the UK and all the shops that we have there. I mean,
You miss
it's just
Primark.
another world here.
You miss TJ Maxx.
I really do. I really do. And just being able to go to places and know that they will have, bigger sizes, waist sizes over a 38, which in this country is super hard to find. There is like one shop which caters for larger men. It's quite old-fashioned. I mean, I know that I do channel the dad aesthetic, but I don't always want to, channel it so precisely that it actually looks 60. There is a difference.
Yeah, we're looking for dad, not
So-
granddad. At least not
Right.
just.
So when you're just walking around on any given day, like, is it just that are there just not that many fat people out and about? Like, is the majority of the population like thin?
It's a good question. I think it can seem like that, but I was actually looking at some stats before coming on to talk to you guys, and obesity rates in Norway are fairly similar to what they are in the west of the West. So again, living in the capital, people generally are thinner. There's generally fewer fat people around. People are more active here. So that can skew the perception of it. And certainly, coming from the UK where there are, fatter people around, you can see the difference. So I'm definitely on the larger side here, whereas in the UK, I think I'm more average, really.
It's interesting because I experienced this when I first came to the UK. I gave myself goddamn whiplash because I ain't never seen fatties on the scale that I see them out here in the UK, just whoosh, 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 just everywhere.
I miss it so much.
Oh my God. But it's the same thing in Australia. People are like, no, the obesity rate in Australia is higher than it is in America. And I'm like, where are they?
Yeah.
Where are they? And, I think this speaks greatly to, it's easy to say, like, oh, here are the numbers, but what is the lifestyle? And this is why these types of questions I think are really important to unpack, because you could go and you may not see them, but they could very well be there just inside doing other things. And that's also fine. But like Britain is such a different culture for it. I mean, for goodness sake, the idea of having like a sesh on a Thursday and getting absolutely rat-assed with your co-workers, and then everyone sort of hobbles into work on a Friday going, and everyone's gathered around dying, drinking fucking Lucasade and Barocas, and just going, oh, we're all gonna clock out at 3 today. Like, wild to me. But hey ho, them's the rubs.
You're making me homesick.
Well, listen, you need to come back so that you and I can do a little Gainer Dad barbecue and feed the fucking vats around here and show them. And I need to show you people, I need to show you bitches how barbecuing is really done. Because I went to a British barbecue, and when I tell you, these little fucking namby-pamby bitches out here with their little Insta-Start little fucking thing from Tesco, little fucking, oh, it's great, you just put sausages on there and it all cooks and it's lovely. And I'm like, that sausage is pink, ain't cooked. I had to educate you fuckers.
I apologize on behalf of the nation.
As you should. Thank you. I take that to heart. Now, I do want to ask this, right? Because normally what we ask here is like, how do you view the gaining culture in more populous places, right? Because it's always curious to know how people who are not traditionally English-speaking Western view England, America. I was about to say England, UK. The big and five and whatnot. But I mean, how do you see the gaining communities are different between the UK and Norway?
Well, in terms of numbers, I mean, I guess it stands to reason a population of 5 million people, which is, less than London, there's going to be fewer of us around. So the community in Norway is very small compared to what I was used to back home. It can be harder to meet people. Again, we've been talking a lot about stereotypes, well, I have at least on this episode today, but another stereotype about Norwegians is that they are very shy. It takes a long time for you to kind of crack the shell, to break through that barrier, to actually get to know somebody on a more than superficial level. And I think that unfortunately, as we've all experienced, that can be especially the case in general when trying to meet people from this community. So it's just another kind of layer of difficulty when it comes to, meeting people in real life, establishing connections. I have found that quite challenging out here in a way that I never really used to in the UK, for example.
This might go back to the whole stereotyping question, but like, because James, you and I have talked about like the cultural differences between like Yankees and British, but like, so in Eastern Europe, or well, they're not really Eastern, Northern, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like not the British Isles, but like everywhere else, I've been told that people tend to be a little cold and standoffish anyway, because you wouldn't be talking to a total stranger because like it's not someone you know, it's not someone you're trying to get to know. Is that true that there's a bit of like an aloofness to the Norwegian people, or am I just crazy?
No, you're not crazy. I think that's certainly true. Whether describing it as aloof is being a bit harsh depends on how you look at it. I certainly can think that on, days when I'm a bit angry at this country and how its people are, but they frame it as politeness. It's kind of like, I'm not gonna mess with your business. I'm just gonna leave you as you are because I don't want you to mess with mine. So don't come over here with your fake politeness. Don't come over here with your like, hi, how are you doing? They don't want to know. They just want to.
See, I would love that. See, maybe I'm just an asshole, but like I would love it if people would just leave me alone in the street because over, in the US, you just get very used to people butting in your business all the fucking time. And it's not something that you're welcoming. It's just what people do. They're just always up in everyone else's business. I would love it to just get from point A to point B without being bothered.
Come to Norway, my friend. You will love it here.
I mean, also London. London is famously shaded by the north and the Midlands of this country as being very cold and very, very frosty, actually, to a lot of people. But then when you're hearing it and amongst it, it makes a lot of sense. Like, there are a lot of weird fucking looking people on the tube. Don't talk to me. Don't even look in my direction. There are people who I have seen on the tube and genuinely held my keys in my hand thinking I might have to go you before the train pulls over because you look fucked. So I think it's a very sensible approach to not getting into tiffs, disagreements with strange individuals, right?
It is. I think it's interesting as well you mentioned, James, about the way that the North perceives the South and particularly London. It's exactly the same in Norway. So Oslo is in the southeast of the country and is disparaged to no end by especially Northern Norwegians as being this very horrible, standoffish, rude place where people aren't genuine, where you can't make connections, where they don't know how to live. There's such a huge parallel with the way that the UK kind of works in that way. I think it's really interesting.
Something else I find really interesting, and I'm getting this vibe more and more as I connect with different people across Europe. You've got, I think, as I always understood it, urban and suburban people, right? Whereas I think in European countries, it's less that there's the suburban distinction and it's more urban and rural, right? People who kind of vibe with one type of connection over another. And in Australia, people who really thrive in the rural are very few and far between. The majority of the people, 95 to 97%, live hugging the coast. We are all urbanites for the most part, right? Whereas I think in European and certainly the smaller countries, that spread is a lot more stretched out, where yes, a good chunk are going to be in the capital, in the major cities, but actually I think, and the UK accounts for this as well, quite a large portion of people are outside of that and really spread throughout and really develop that local culture, which is why the UK has so many variable accents. And I'm aware that I think in a lot of the Scandies, there's a lot of different dialects that crop up, a lot of accents, a lot of regional identity that becomes very specific. Like, yes, we are this, but more specifically, we are this, and this is what sets us apart from everyone else. And I find that really, really fascinating that people kind of hold on to that more specialized identity within it. To kind of bring it around more to, I suppose, the delicacies of the situation, what would you say is your favorite Norwegian snack, drink, and meal? We talking food now, bitch.
We're talking food. I'm excited. Ooh, that is, I mean, again, stereotypes, but Norway's not exactly famed for its cuisine. There's lots of hearty food, nothing wrong with that, but sort of it's not big on flavor over here. We got lots of sort of stews, potatoes, turnips, cabbage, all of that kind of yummy stuff, which I'm a huge fan of, but generally receives a bit of a negative rep. However, there are some gems. The best chocolate in the world, and I will not take any kind of feedback about this, is Norwegian chocolate. It is just so good. I used to think that dairy milk was the peak of chocolate existence. Don't judge me. But then I moved over here and oh my God, I'll have to like bring you guys a bar because it's just so nice.
My address is 19 at... No, I'm joking. I will message you my address after this because I think if you have some chocolate that you could be sending, I think you should prioritize that. Get that to my address and I will absolutely be giving you some feedback on that matter. I remember when I first tried Hershey's and it hurt me because it tasted like vomit.
It genuinely does. I was shocked.
When they make Hershey's chocolate over in Europe, do they use the same recipe that we use
I don't
here?
think...
Or-
I doubt it. It probably wouldn't be allowed.
No, I don't mean to say this like this, but I don't think they...
So, James, are you saying you tried a Hershey's bar from America? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. Well, all I know is when I tried it, it was bad, and I didn't like it. And I asked an American friend at the time about this, and they were the one who explained to me that, and I'm sure we've shared this story on the pod before, it's the whole, back in the times of colonization, and they didn't have like milk producing things over there, but they had them in Europe. They would make the chocolate over in Europe and bring it over to America, which is wild because they were bringing cocoa beans from South America. So it was traveling all the way across the Atlantic to get made and then all the way back to get eaten. But it would spoil on the way. The milk solids would spoil. And so when eventually Americans had the opportunity to make their own chocolate and they made it, they were like, oh, this doesn't taste like the chocolate that we've grown to know and love. So they intentionally add a chemical that gives it that flavor. And that breaks my heart. But it's okay. It's okay. Tim, do you know what? When I went to America, I brought this fat fucker Jaffa cakes.
You did. Which then I realized that we actually make them here too.
Oh, what was the verdict?
I thought they were amazing. Now the ones from the UK tasted much better than the ones I could buy at Aldi's, but you know, there's only so much you can do about that. The candy that I really went wild for were those jelly babies.
Mm.
Oh, jelly babies.
Yeah, I was like, I've never, because like it was the consistency. The consistency of a jelly baby was not that of a regular gummy that I'm very used to. It was like literally solid jelly. And I'm like, how do you take jelly and make it solid? Like,
it is alchemy.
Outside, you know?
Huh?
Okay, James, if I'm sending you a bar of Norwegian chocolate, then
I'll send you
return, yes.
We'll negotiate. It's fabulous. Listen, Linda. I'll say
£10.
this. There is something to be said about colonization, and no, it wasn't great. But what the British did for confectionery cannot be understated. What the British have done for candy and for sweets and for lollies cannot be I quite literally have been savoring this gorgeous bag of lemon sherbet lemons. I'm absolutely besotted by them. They're just so fucking good. Oh my god.
There is one thing that I can't stand, like one British confection that I think is disgusting, is those
the royal family.
Besides them. No, those licorice all sorts.
Oh,
like where they look like
yeah.
toilet rolls. Like those are just gross.
Yeah, licorice is disgusting.
I don't do licorice. Now,
No.
is licorice very popular in the Scandies?
Oh my god, it's huge here.
Mm-hmm.
It's massive. People love it. They can't get enough of it, and super strong stuff. It takes like the skin in your like inside of your mouth off. It's just beautiful.
That aniseed flavor. Ooh.
Yeah,
Ooh.
They love it.
It's like sambuca. Oh.
Ugh.
Oh my god, no, can't do it. Sorry, Norwegians listening, you've got to get into the DMs and explain to me why you hate yourselves and you drink fucking sambuca. Explain yourselves. You've got to tell me. Anyways, back. Sorry, I'm all over it today. Norwegian chocolate, right? So it's not dairy milk. So is it? Because there are technically 4 types of chocolate: milk, white, dark, and now ruby chocolate, right? Because it's based on the type of bean that they use. What type of chocolate is it? Is it still dairy milk in that it is that? It's just made differently to Cadbury type of thing?
So yeah, the OG bar is a milk bar, but it comes in lots of variations as well. So you can buy dark versions, you can buy versions with, different flavors like nuts and fruit and nut and caramel and the usual stuff basically. But it's just, I think it's less sweet, and that kind of sounds counterintuitive. Why would you want a less sweet chocolate? But coming back to dairy milk from Freya, which is the name of this brand, it just tastes too sweet now. There's something just so wholesomely kind of chocolatey about the chocolate here. I can't quite put my finger on it. And another reason I have to send you guys a bar so that you can sample it for yourselves.
I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I will. One of the only good things Weatherspoons ever did was when they used to do their hot chocolates, and you'd get that stick of Belgian chocolate on the end, and they'd pump out that hot milk straight into the mug, and then you'd just be swirling that Belgian chocolate. And it was luxe. It wasn't sweet, but it was very cocoa-y. And I think that's a marvelous flavor. And yeah, sometimes I'm a little bit like, when a dessert gets so sweet that you can almost taste the granules of sugar, I'm a little bit like, I gotta really be in the mood. Like, I want like a candied strawberry almost, like that kind of dusted in sugar, toffee coating, tart sweetness. Like, you want the overload. Sherbet lemons, right? But chocolate, I think there's something really gorgeous about like a nice cocoa-y. There's a brand here called Divine, their dark chocolate. Oh, stunning. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, drink and meal. Let us have it.
Ooh, a drink. I mean, I am partial to a beer or two, as I watched James finishing a can there. Maybe not a beer, but Norwegians do make very good beer. They make a mean Pilsner. They make a mean IPA. So I think I would offer up a Norwegian beer as my choice of beverage. In terms of meal, that is a difficult one. There is a Norwegian institution which is quite cringe to explain to, particularly an American, but it's called Taco Friday.
What?
Yep, it's exactly what it sounds like, where every Friday you assemble your taco from the taco aisle that is present in most supermarkets, which consists of the lamest old El Paso kids and like the sort of most dodgy looking pots of guac that would make
How the hell
any
does
American...
that catch on in Norway?
Yeah, well, I mean, tacos were, the hit thing in the UK about 20 years ago. But the fact that it's still this sort of, exciting new phenomenon over here kind of thing, that should tell you all you need to know about Norwegian food culture.
To be fair, the same thing happened in Australia. I grew up just quoting that little brown girl going, "Lo que nos es dos." Do 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 do. Like, yeah, like it was everywhere. You couldn't escape it. And then it wasn't until like 10, 15 years later that I met like a Latin American person for the first time and went, "Oh my God, they're real." Like, I just thought you were made up on TV. Which, to be fair, right, Australia is about as far away as you can get from South America. Like, you've got to travel a long way in order to get to it. So understandably, long flight, tired arms. Don't make the trip.
And I guess I haven't really answered your question because you asked me what was kind of a nice meal from Norway, which I enjoyed, and I've just been telling you about this awful taco. But there are some really lovely, Norway coast fish. There's some amazing fish here. The smoked salmon is just divine. It's just on another level. I think often, even though like Scotland is a big producer of smoked salmon from a UK perspective, it often has this kind of like greasy quality to it, which you just don't find with the salmon over here. And it's just such a treat to have. It's often eaten at Christmas, and it's just, one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I've found that because I would make fish obviously in various forms back in Australia, and the salmon here, I don't know, I thought it was kind of in my head that I was, because obviously the way that I prepare it is like you take it out and like you're wanting to soak up all the excess moisture so that when it fries nicely. But I was always just like, it felt like there was so much extra oil coming out of it, right? And I was a bit like, it doesn't.
Why are you frying smoked salmon? That might be your first mistake.
No, I'm just frying salmon in general.
Right, okay.
But like, I just found that like it would come out so much more greasily than like salmon I would get back in Australia. And I don't know, I want to experience fish in Norway. I also imagine like maybe like fried fish culture, like fish and chips, very quintessentially British. But I wonder like, how is that in Norway?
Actually, the Norwegians have adopted fish and chips as a sort of popular way of preparing food here. You find some fried dishes, but I think generally because of how expensive frying historically has been. I mean, Norway now is a very rich country, but for a lot of its history, it was a very poor country. Until they found oil here in the 60s and 70s, Norway was not a well-off place. as we've said, it's difficult to live here. The land is tough. It's cold. It's on the edge of Europe. Like, stuff just doesn't get here and stuff doesn't grow here. So what was the point I was making? What was the point I was making?
Fish and chips.
Fish and chips, that's right, yeah. There's not much fried stuff here, is the conclusion. But today, fish and chips is super popular. And you can find it in loads of like really bougie forms that would never fly in the UK. Like sort of really delicately prepared. I'm just like, this is not fish and chips. You have ruined fish and chips. Fish and chips is the most like basic, and I mean that in a really good way. It's the most basic food you can get. It's just no frills, no pretensions, from the chippy, like greasy as hell.
Yeah, you almost want the chippy to look like it wouldn't pass OSHA.
Yes,
You know what I
exactly.
mean? Like, that's how you know it's good.
Well, wasn't that the whole point of the newspaper, was to soak up all the grease?
Yeah,
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
it's funny. I
But
know.
here you kind of see it prepared in like really gourmet ways with like vegetables. I'm like, what are you doing? This is
Yeah,
not
unless
fish
it's like,
and chips.
unless it's like a pot of mushy peas, like you've already fucked.
Right. The only vegetable allowed.
The only vegetable allowed. But I will say, like, I know I make jokes about, like, you know, there's that meme going around like, oh, it's buffing a whale, your favourite people, like, you know, British eating, and it can be like that. But one of my favorite TikToks is an American girl who goes, I came downstairs. It is a Saturday, and my housemate, this British girl, was making a jacket potato in the microwave, and all she did was slather it in butter, and then she put tuna and mayonnaise in a bowl, and I ate it. And it was the most incredible thing I've ever fucking eaten. Like, absolutely. I will say, for everything that, again, Britain has fucked up in many ways, but listen, what they did for the potato.
No notes.
No, it's just really hit a home run on that one. But once again,
What about over here, where we we slather them with cheese, like the au gratin potato?
Was that in America?
Never had that before, where it's like all sliced up and like baked with cheese and cream and.
What,
Ooh.
potato dauphinoise?
I suppose that's what it is. We call it au gratin, but I don't know where it comes from. I just know that you can get it in a fucking package at the grocery store. I don't know who invented it. Like a typical American, I don't care who invented it because it tastes
like
good.
a true American.
I don't fucking know. It's covered in goddamn Velveeta.
But it comes in a packet.
It comes in a box.
Who's that one woman on TikTok? It's like, it don't slide down easy if it ain't cheesy. Like,
Very that.
Look, I can't defend Americans. We are lazy when it comes to learning about the rest of the world.
Oh, I mean, so are Brits. I think,
Yeah.
on a European basis, we have an appalling reputation as being just so unaware and unwilling to learn anything else. So,
the British
don't apologize, Tim.
conquer the global south, take all the spices and flavors, and then proceed to use absolutely none of them.
Well, and what did you call them? Potatoes Devonnois? Is that what you said they were?
Dauphinois.
Dauphinois. Oh, what is that?
Français, mon chéri.
Yeah, I know it's French, but what is it?
So essentially,
Basically what you described.
Okay.
well, yeah.
Sliced potatoes with cream.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I don't know how it got the name au gratin, but that's how it
It's
wound up.
probably another word for cheesy, creamy, deliciously lovely goodliness. That's what I call it. But to bring it back around to Norway in the episode,
We have been
You really should have got a
completely
Norwegian on here,
unfocused.
shouldn't
Oh
you?
my
not a
god.
Brit?
oh, I'm so sorry. I feel so unhinged. I think we're gonna have to have you back, but not for any episode in particular. We'll just give ourselves a basic prompt, and we'll just see where this trio.
Yeah, we just the three of us just need to have a conversation about something.
I really
gallop
think so,
into the
yeah.
distance. Norwegian characters. Obviously, we typically ask this in terms of like growing up, right? But like from your being in Norway, are there like people on TV? Are there cartoon characters, cinema characters that maybe they are a bit larger and maybe inspire a sense of like joy of size?
There are a couple of comedians, I think, as perhaps is often the case around the world, who perhaps they don't embrace their size so much as they are, comfortable being themselves in a fatter body. But unfortunately, I think it's often accepted because they are comedians, because, fat is funny, right? They're fat people, so they must be funny. There's no other way that we can kind of frame fatness in a sort of cultural, level, on a kind of societal level. So I wouldn't really say that there's anybody that I know of, at least. Again, Norwegians listening, please come with corrections to this, but there's nobody that I can really think of who embodies fatness in a non-funny way, in inverted commas.
No, I think that's a good point to focus on for a second here, because it's the same in many, many places. Like in Australia, I don't really recall plus-size characters growing up. The biggest ones on TV were The Simpsons. And of course, as much as we can enjoy "dough" and other catchphrases, Homer Simpson is not a positive representation of fatness. In fact, I think one of the only positive cartoon representations of male fatness I've ever seen is Shrek, which is kind of terrifying.
Honestly, though.
We had Fat Albert for a while, but that was in the 60s
But
or
again,
70s.
was his size? I mean, listen, he was called Fat Albert. I'm going to presume that his size was rather a moniker of comedy.
Yeah, I mean, most of the jokes related to his weight, but then he had a whole group of people around him that they were all like stereotypes, and they all had like the only other one that I remember was Mushmouth, and he was apparently like his speech was so garbled nobody understood what he said. So
Yeah, I think a good idea of a positive fat representation is just when they are allowed to be fat, and it doesn't matter whether they're a good guy or a villain, but their storyline cannot center around their weight. It cannot center around their size, It's like people pointed at Fat Thor like it was positive representation, but pretty much any time he opened his mouth, the response from characters was, "Shut up, fatty, and have another donut." And he was struggling to not drink himself into a stupor and stumble around going, "Ugh." So, it's not good. Is there a phrase in either Norwegian, or if you know any Sami, is there a phrase that you might say to other like Norwegian gainers as like a, "Oh bitch, you look hot"?
I guess I'll start answering that by saying that I unfortunately don't know any Sami, but wow, it would be amazing if you got a Sami speaker on here to speak to that, because that would be a completely different perspective, which I think would be really awesome. In terms of a Norwegian phrase that I enjoy, there is one which is, I will just say in Norwegian, it's "å legge på seg," or "legge på seg." And this is the idea, it's basically gaining. And you can hear the word legge, it's related to the English word layer. It's kind of sort of you're just layering yourself with like fat, with muscle, with whatever, just sort of like expanding and expanding. I really love the image that phrase conjures up.
Or legge på seg.
Legge på seg, yeah, to put on weight, to gain weight. Mm.
Oh, that's cute. I like that. Now, we've talked a little bit about what the community kind of looks like in Norway, but like, what changes would you like to see in the local gaming scene?
I guess I would like to see more of a willingness among the people who make up the community to be more proactive and get in touch and actually form a sense of community. I think that's really what's missing to an extent here. There are some Grommrs which are organized in Oslo occasionally, which is amazing, but they are unfortunately quite badly attended. Even though the community is growing, actually, pun intended, it's actually growing fairly quickly. There's quite a few new guys on the scene just in the past couple of years, but a lot of people do tend to stay in the background. And again, I know what I'm describing is a universal problem, right? This is not exactly news to either of you or anyone listening, but yeah, more of a sense of community would be amazing. And it's about finding ways of cultivating that, because I suppose the way that the Grommrs are organized now aren't working. And I don't mean that as shade to the organizer, but if nobody's going to them, then is it really, is that really working?
It's interesting because obviously this is honestly one of the biggest pieces of response we get when we ask this question is we want more engagement, we want more people to show interest. And I think we do have to begin to ask the question, Grommrs as they are formatted now, if people aren't wanting to attend, or if people have a preconceived notion that makes them not want to attend, we have to maybe, instead of thinking, oh, let's put on an event, what does that mean to put on an event? Like, what do people actually want to do? Like, I had the opportunity to host some grow-offs here in the UK once upon a time, and both times I did it, I made sure it was at a pub
Yeah.
because the Brits love a drink. That made sense to me. In other places in the world, maybe that Gromoff needs to be a picnic. Maybe that Gromoff needs to be seasonally specific. Maybe that Gromoff needs to involve water because people love to be near the water. Who knows? But like, maybe people just need to ask the question, like, hey, fellow human, if I were to throw a Gromoff, what would you want at
I'm
said
so
event?
scared that the answer would be it has to involve skiing, and then I would definitely not be going to it.
Yeah, but like you could do the opposite, right? Where instead of skiing, it could be Gnix, where it's like in reverse. But instead of like skiing downhill, you're constantly just like taking that travelator like up the slope, and then like drinking all the way up and imbibing, and then you get off and have to ski back down,
No,
but
I'm going round again.
and then go round again. So it pats. You got to go back round again. Like,
Okay, now you're speaking my language. This I could get behind.
there you go. Do you know what? Me and Tim, we gonna come to
Oh
Norway.
God, like a ski lift that's like, it was just a conveyor belt with seats, but like, like a food station at the top, food station at the bottom. Like you just keep going around and around.
Or
I
maybe
mean,
it's
ideal Gromoff.
maybe it's like a sort of supersized sushi train where actually instead of being on the seats, you're all congregated at the top, but people keep at the bottom keep putting like fresh meals on the seats, and like it keeps going around. And you just sort of pick, oh, I'll take that one, and then you sort of trundle off to a couple of benches up near the top and have a nosh, and then you've all got to go back downhill. And maybe we'll go tobogganing instead of skiing or something. You know, that seems more fat boy friendly to be sat on one's rump when going downhill at 50 miles an hour.
I think I'm gonna have a word with the Gromoff coordinator here because with these are some great ideas.
Listen, CC me a bitch. CC me and I'm about my flights because I
All
need
creds to you.
exactly. Um, but I do also want to ask here, like, because we've talked, I think, a lot around Norway and Scandinavia and a lot of fun things tonight. Um, what is an aspect of your life in Norway that we haven't touched on that you'd want to talk about?
That I, despite appearances, I love being active. I have embraced that aspect of the lifestyle quite surprisingly more than I thought I would. And perhaps a lot of that is peer pressure. Perhaps a lot of that is just kind of trying to fit in, but it genuinely is such a great place to be outside in and just go around and enjoy the scenery and the surroundings and being out in nature. Like today, for example, I got up at 6 a.m. to go on a hike, which, why not on a Wednesday? Bit crazy, I understand. And I would never have done that when I was living in the UK, but there is just something about this place. It does cool you. There's a real soul to Scandinavia, I think, without being too poetic. But it's just a very magical place to live, and I've really grown to appreciate the opportunities that are literally on your doorstep. I mean, living in Oslo, I'm 10 minutes away from the coast. I'm 50 minutes away from the forest. There are very few other capital cities in the world, I would think, that you can say that. And that can be swimming in the summer, that can be hiking at all times of year, that can be skiing in the winter, that can be, saunas as well on the coast. Like there's so many ways that you can get in touch with nature and the outdoors, which I think the Norwegians have cracked really well.
So the Norwegians have discovered. Oh God, what was that? I was going to make a really funny gay joke. Cruising. Norwegians have discovered cruising saunas in the park at night. My God, they're just really rolling it all into one.
I do live just 5 minutes away from Oslo's premier cruising spot, so
And of
So
course,
I hear.
of course, she knows the minutes because she has counted as she has waddled her fat ass there to the park.
Well, there's something we didn't touch on. How do they view, queer people? Is it queer friendly? Are there plenty of queer spaces where people are safe? Like, is there any kind of religious or moral pushback from society about their acceptance of queerness?
Fantastic. I'm so glad you asked me that because I wanted to touch on it myself. So here's an anecdote from the Oslo Tourist Board, which is focused at visitors to the country, obviously. When you click on the section which says LGBT nightlife, which the section exists on the website, which is already good, the line that greets you is something like, because Norway is such a gay-friendly destination, we don't need gay bars. This is the official line here. And it's like, that is just so wrong on so many levels. I mean, okay, fantastic. It could be a lot worse. Norway is a very accepting country in general. There is a rise in homophobic hate crimes, sadly, as there is in a lot of countries. But generally, I've never felt unsafe here. Although, of course, there was the attack in the nightclub just last year, which I know made international media, which was really, really shocking. But again, that happened at basically the one gay club in Oslo. Like, I'm not exaggerating, there is one gay club in Oslo. So I don't know whether I quite buy this line about the fact that because this is such a easygoing, accepting country where you don't need gay spaces. That's not the point of gay spaces. I find it so frustrating that that's kind of the line that people accept as well, because there's no push to make bigger queer spaces. There's no push to make other places that, you know, people can meet. Of course, there's smaller events that happen. There's like club takeovers that occur every so often. There's, you know,
but there's nowhere to go
festivals
there's nowhere to go on a Saturday night for like a local drag show.
Not really, not on a weekly basis at least. And you know, Oslo being a city of nearly 1 million people and a capital, you kind of think there would be. But yeah, another thing I miss about the UK is the availability and access to queer spaces. It's just not a thing here, and it's explained away by that really quite problematic statement that I just quoted. I guess things that underlie that are, you know, some societal reticence. Norway isn't quite the sort of, you know, it's not a cultural powerhouse. It doesn't kind of lead the way in terms of the way that, you know, the UK and the US often do in terms of these things. But generally speaking, people are accepting. And I guess the most important takeaway is, of course, that you are free to be yourself in this country to an overwhelmingly large extent. And yes, it is very sad and, yeah, lamentable that there aren't more queer spaces, but we can't take for granted living in a safe and accepting society. So, yeah, that should be the conclusion.
It's interesting when I then think about Priscilla, because, of course, this is an iconic queer film, queer Australian film, that I think genuinely reflects a very important narrative, which is the importance of pride and representation everywhere. It's very easy to get stuck in our big mecca cities like in Sydney, like, you know, at King's Cross, and be going, this is how things are, this is fabulous, this is wonderful. But you could be in the middle of the outback and you still need a touch of fabulous. You still need drag and queer representation and all of it. And, you know, I think bringing it back around to what we've kind of been talking about today, even just with fatness and gaining, I think it kind of calls out on why these things are really important, because you, I think, have a foundation of everything you have. It kind of comes from that British heritage for you, your life in the UK. And so you are able to go other places and sort of live and deal and be and adapt, hiking, as you say. But I think, you know, for people who maybe come from cultures, and for me, this was a lot of that coming from Australia. I grew up in a very thin family, in a very thin society that is all about beach bodies and all of that. It is hard to find your footing to activate the true inner gainer. So I think that representation is important. But also I just want to say thank you for coming on tonight and having a laugh with us and sharing your experiences. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and I can't believe how quick the time's gone. I just looked at the clock. It's crazy.
Like, yes, an hour has already passed. Now, where can our listeners find you online?
They can find me on Grommr at gloutonglee, and same username on Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, that's it for another week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. Now, if you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at Thiccy Mouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or at our website at www.podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes. And you can also write to us at thethickradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stan and Thicc.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Logitsu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify Premium.